Hi and welcome, it's Dean from Avstar Observatory. We're going to, in this video, go through the recent data that we collected this morning here at the observatory. We've got out a few of our utensils, or equipment should we say, and done a few measurements. So we're going to get into that, but before we do, big thanks to Wiesel yesterday for your support. You pledged to the observatory. And just want to mention that we are an official observatory. We don't just talk about these things like other channels on YouTube. We have our own equipment and some bespoke equipment, and that is what we collect the measurements with. Guys, CO2 today, as you will see, is probably the lowest I've ever recorded. 405. I wouldn't say at this moment that CO2 is dropping, but that is one of the lowest recorded CO2 measurements we've ever took. As you can see, atmospheric oxygen just over 20%, as you would expect. Massive reservoir of oxygen in our atmosphere. We use the Luminox sensor to record accurately the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere, similar to what is used, I believe, on military aircraft, and there's obviously a lot of applications where the Luminox sensor is actually used that measures the oxygen. You can see the longitude and latitude of the last reading we did on the 17th of last month. The radiation background has dropped a little bit from the last time we took a reading. I think it was 216, no, 100.16 I think it was. It's as you can see 00.13. 27 volcanoes in eruption around the world, and there's your latest earthquake measuring at 5.7, 41 kilometers east northeast of Los Andes, Chile. We've got the muons per square meter per hour here in the UK at 542, and it shouldn't be a surprise that the muons are nearly twice that amount from Canada. Thanks, Kendall, for sending those the other day. And yeah, everything's fine at the observatory, so big thanks for your input as well. Sunspots 3, geomagnetic field has now returned to quiet. Solar X-rays are normal, and the jet streams conditions are unsettled. As you know, we have an increase in cosmic radiation, which has made it possible for the jet streams to hold more moisture, and as a result of that, you get dislocation over the northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere with the polar and subtropical jet streams, and that is what's causing all the climatic changes that we've been seeing now for at least 30 years. And it is not, as they would like to tell you, global warming caused by man emitting too much CO2 into the atmosphere, because I think we have covered that subject very well in the last week. But yeah, guys, what I wanted to talk about now with you is your plans and your preps, what you've made. So let's get on with that. So let's talk about your preparations that you've made for whatever it is you've prepped for. I mean, let's just give it, for instance, let's say we went back into a glacial period in the next 12 months where temperatures dropped on average by 8 degrees. That would be enough to put most of the northern hemisphere, not after too long, back in ice, or glaciers would start to form. But if you lived over 40 degrees latitude and you grew your own food, how would you cope then with trying to manage growing your own food? Because a lot of land would completely go offline. I know a lot of people would say then, well, we got a greenhouse, but is the greenhouse enough to feed you and your family? And can you heat that greenhouse? Because if the temperatures are dropping, it could be the fact that the temperatures have dropped that much, you might not be able to get your crops out, or even begin to put your crops in, because the soil might be too hard, might be frozen. So have you thought about how you're going to heat those things up to keep your food going, or are you going to relocate at that point? Because that is the standard for a lot of species. When it becomes unbearable to get those essentials for life, they migrate. Only problem is with us human beings is that we have barred ourselves from free migration, and it's not that easy with borders and countries declaring their sovereignty over certain parts of land. And the other thing is as well, we was talking about this last week, places like Canada and Europe, I mean, they're going to be hit hard in another glacial period, and it's not a matter of if it's going to happen, it's just a case of when it's going to happen. We're already overdue, and we should be already dipping below that 0 degree line where we go into lower temperatures over the northern hemisphere. So other things you have to think about, are you able to migrate to somewhere below at least 40 degree latitude on the earth? And if so, how many other people are going to be doing that at the same time? We're talking billions of people that live over that line. And it's not to say that even below that line, we're going to have sub-zero temperatures on a regular basis. Probably a lot of America will be covered in snow and ice. And like I say, have you prepared for all these things? Have you actually given it some serious thought? I understand some people might not want to migrate. They don't want to leave their country. They're just going to stick it out and try and bear it out as much as they can. But have you actually tested some of the provisions that you've put up for yourselves? I'm not talking about your food storage, and if you haven't got one of those, I would recommend you have at least 3 months worth of food. And I would not recommend you start using that 3 months worth of food. What I would recommend, if you found yourself in a situation like that, is try to forage food before you start using your 3 month supply, because it could be a while before things settle down. And let's say if, there was an announcement on the radio one day where because of the extreme weather conditions, like similar to what they had in Texas, where 100 million people were affected. But let's say if that continued on for a long period of time, have you thought about actually how you would use your provisions? It's better if you've got food to use what you can forage. That gives you an extra day on your 3 months. What we've seen already during the pandemic, the beginning of the pandemic, people panic bought food, emptied shelves out of the shops, and left a lot of people without. And can you imagine that on a prolonged scale? Would it be difficult for your country to get their imports in? Would the ice have blocked shipping lanes? These are things we really need to start thinking about. Will the electric stay on? It's unlikely, isn't it? Things like that. You know what? I just want to ask you to just do this one thing to see just exactly what it would be like. Let's say you had to leave your house. Have you ever slept on a hard floor? Not with a pillow. Don't cheat. Do it tonight as an exercise. Just get used to what you're going to be up against. And experience sleeping on a hard floor. I mean, this is what we done the weekend, and it weren't easy, I've got to say. I don't have a lot of meat on me anyhow, so my hips are pretty skinny. But it got a bit painful just lying on the hard floor. So give it a try. Just that one experience of doing something like that can give you an idea of what it'd be like out there. And that's not to say that you're going to be warm sleeping on that floor. And back in the old days in this country, when wars were being fought, I'm talking about King Richard and King Henry going to war. It weren't too far from here anyhow. Bosworth, the Battle of Bosworth, I think it was, where Henry beat Richard. And a lot of those soldiers that was gathered up on the way to the battlefields from little villages and things like that would find themselves sleeping in the hedgerows to keep warm. That wouldn't be a very good thing to do, because you could just imagine how many lice and ticks and things like that you're going to pick up sleeping in those sorts of places. But this is what they did, and that might be something that a few of us could find ourselves in. I mean, we are seriously looking at a disaster taking place because of the reluctancy of the governments to focus on real issues. Yes, it's climate change, but it's going to go very negative for them soon when temperatures start to fall and we start to find ourselves merging back into a glacial period. And that might not be too far around the corner. And the reason why I say that is because if you look at the recent ice gains in the Arctic Circle, you'll see that 2 million square kilometres, which is a huge expanse, has come back in 12 months. That's more since 2012. We haven't had another year like that. So that's how much ice has been regained in just 12 months in 2021. So, you know, these things can rapidly take hold. And I don't think the electric companies could angle that sort of change in the climate. I don't think farmers could adapt very quickly to grow crops which are more favourable for that climate overnight. I don't think that these things will happen, and as a reason for that, I think, you know, we're looking at a real serious issue where, you know, pandemonium's going to break out. And I will tell you this, and you might find this hard to get your head round, but I will tell you this: there will be large scale cannibalism, because people that are trapped in cities that can't get food after a couple of weeks are going to start killing for it. And when there is no food to kill for, then there is plenty of food walking round with two eyes in the front of their heads. And you've got to realise that we are, by nature, predators. That's why our eyes are in the front of our heads. And this is not something that was not too long in our history very rife. I'm talking about the blockades of Stalingrad, or St. Petersburg, I think it's called now. But, you know, there was in a year over 2,000 cannibals arrested. So when food runs out and there is no food to get, people turn to themselves, and so cannibalism will be very rife. I mean, you imagine if there is a large-scale disaster and our governments don't start really doing something about, you know, planning and prepping for this next event, then, you know, cannibalism is going to be one of those things that's going to come straight back. As much as we all would like to think we wouldn't do it, we would. And, you know, it wasn't just cannibalism. You could use a lot of the examples from the blockade in St. Petersburg as a good gauge as to how people would behave during such times, because there was killing something like 100,000 people every month on top of that, fighting over food rations. So that's what really you have to have in the back of your mind. So you might want to think, can I grow food still? Is migration an option? You know, how quickly will things deteriorate? These are all serious matters that you need to sit down and really talk with your family, because these are events that we are likely to see in our lifetimes, and that's without the hindrance of the magnetic pole reversal, you know, really throwing up some climatic changes in its own right. So, you know, these are the things that, you know, we need to all start thinking about. And, you know, have you got Arctic clothes set aside, or good thermal waterproof clothing? Because I put mine to the test the other day and I ended up getting soaked through right to the boxer shorts. It wasn't good. It wasn't a nice experience. Even I took some dry clothes with me. Those had got wet as well before I even got to put them on. So, you know, that wasn't even in a disaster situation. That was just us going out to try and catch some fish on Chisel Beach this weekend down in Weymouth. You know, it really was a testing 40 odd hours, and trying to get out of Weymouth with all those floods. Again, this is something you've got to start to really seriously think about. Is your car going to be one of these cars that cuts out in the middle of the flood? You know, I saw a lot of cars breaking down because they just weren't using common sense. They was blasting through these flooded regions, and of course it's only a matter of time before, you know, the air intake takes a good gulp of water and then hydraulics your comrades in your engine, and that will be it. That will be enough to cut it out. And if you drive a BMW, you might want to have a look at the gearbox. There's something on the gearboxes of them BMWs that shuts off the drive, and that's why they break down all the time in the puddles. It's just ridiculous. A relative of mine, my brother, he works for a breakdown company, and he's told me that he's always BMWs in, not that deep water even, that are breaking down. So there's something seriously wrong with them for them to do that. I'm not sure how the four-wheel drive versions of them, like the X5s, get on, but certainly the family cars and the saloons are the types that break down for some reason. So, there's lots of things you need to think about, and like somebody said, you can have even the best gear, but if you haven't got the ideas or the inclination how to use that gear, it's probably no good to you. You've got to learn to use your gear. Fishing could be one of the only sources of food for you, and it's good if you live by a reasonable sized lake. There might be plenty of fish in there that you can eat, or if you live by the coastal region, there is always an abundance of food in the oceans. But I don't know how long that would last with all of a sudden an extra couple of billion people putting rods into the oceans to take out the fish stocks. How long would they last? These are some serious issues that we're going to face, and I am pretty confident that the numbers of people, we're talking billions of people over 40-degree latitude on this earth, but it wouldn't take long for a lot of those people to perish simply because they couldn't maintain food for themselves and their families. It will really come down to not whether you've got a job or you can keep your job. It'll be whether you can keep your family fed and keep them warm, and those will be the main things that you need to do at that time. And we are merging into a time where that is going to be really possible soon. It is a shame to see the governments wasting their efforts and trillions of pounds on CO2 global warming when there are other issues which I don't think anyone would mind them taxing. If there was putting in provisions for everybody for the next glacial period and changing the infrastructure now for that when it does happen, then I don't think we mind paying a little bit extra taxes for that. But when we are paying taxes for something we know, or at least a couple of percent of us on this planet know, is a hoax and is just a method to tax people, that's all it is. There is nothing they can do with that taxpayers' money that will reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. It's ridiculous. You saw it on the charts last week. It'd take 100,000 years to drop CO2 by 100 parts per million, and it's at 400 parts per million. And in any case, do you really want to drop it? What is thriving right now is all the vegetation on this planet, and even in some cases places that never had vegetation at all. We're talking about some of the deserts now are going greener as a result of that, and NASA proved that with their satellite photos. They saw it going greener, and it can only be for the fact that CO2 has increased. So it's not a bad thing. It doesn't affect us. I mean, right now in this room, CO2 is probably at 1,000 parts per million, and I'm not passing out. I feel quite comfortable if there was a few more people in this room. You would go up to probably 1,500 parts per million. You get on a train and it's probably at 2,500 parts per million on a morning's commute to work. Trust me. So, adding a little bit extra CO2 into the atmosphere doesn't really affect anything. In fact, it benefits the biodiversity of vegetation on this planet, so it's not a bad thing. Okay, we're still trying to raise some money for this observatory. There's a link down there in the description. It would be great if you could help us. We'll give you a mention as well. Big thanks again to Wiesel for your help yesterday. And if you do go onto the website, I know 15,000 people do every week. We get 15,000 views on there. Why not click the donate link? There's a lot of information on there, and like I say, we don't just talk about these things. We use the scientific method, we use the equipment, and we collect the data and relay it to you guys, and it's all archived on the website for you, so that you don't need to, if you hear people talking about all the volcanoes are going off in the world, you can go and check. We regularly monitor the amount of active volcanoes around the world that are in eruption. and you can check that, and you can go back into the archive over the last 12 months, even more now. We're just building up the archive data now that much that you can check CO2 over the last year. You'll see that it hasn't increased. You can check atmospheric oxygen if that's a concern of yours. Shouldn't be, because there's a massive reservoir up there in our atmosphere of 20% and over, nearly 21% of our atmosphere is oxygen. So, even though, we've got cars and planes all burning oxygen in their combustion, we've still got plenty in their reservoir, and we're not going to run out anytime soon. That is, of course, if the magnetosphere don't collapse, and then there's a bit of an issue, which I'm sure we'll cover at that point in time, if that is the case. So, guys, have a great afternoon. Take care of your loved ones, and like I say, link down there if you want to help us. As always, bye for now.